JJ Meets World is brought to you by Weedman Design. Adam Weedman founded Weedman Design Company in 2016 on the belief that one-on-one relationships are more important than being a one-stop shop. Adam works with you to get your message across and to make you look good to your clients. Let's face it, in this day and age where it's easier than ever to be visible, if you don't look good, then you look bad. Adam designed our logo for JJ Meets World, and if he can make me look good, he can make anybody look good. Whether you're looking for something for the web, something for the top of stationery, or maybe you just want that business card that pops, you're going to want to check out weedmandesign.co. That's Weedman, WIEDMAN design.co.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
I'm trolling through Facebook the other day, and there's a Facebook group for people who take pictures of other people who park, and they park over the line, or they are parking in a no parking zone, and it's all about internet shaming. All these people collect photos, and some blur out the license plates, but some don't, and it's gotten to the point now where people take the photo and will sit in the parking lot and wait up to an hour for the actual individual to walk out so that they can take pictures of that person as well. And these are some of the same people who I see posting about, oh, I can't believe that Facebook gave away my privacy, and I can't believe that my personal data is being breached. And I think to myself, you're acting like a junior PI for someone who just parked like a jerk. What are you doing out there? Why are you giving your time up to this? And one of them got very, very intense, and I'm gonna tell you folks about why I read probably 45 minutes worth of content and actually turned on notifications for this so that every time someone posted something new, I jumped into the fray at 117 comments. It was a guy who had parked in an underground parking structure, big pickup truck, and he was well over the line, enough so that another car couldn't park in there. There just wasn't the space. So someone takes a picture, uploads it to the Facebook group, and later on says, I wanted to add a little something else so this person really knew how big of a D-bag they were. I put my leftover garbage from my fast food trip on the hood of his car so he'd really get the message. And so he shows a picture of like a drink container and an old bag on top of this guy's car. Well, eventually somebody says, oh, I know whose truck that is, and brings the actual owner of the truck into the group conversation. Now, this is where it goes off the rail, kiddos, because this guy is livid, so angry. How dare you put garbage on my car? Do you know how disrespectful that is? Maybe I parked like a jerk, but you know what? That's not against the law, but trying to ruin my car is against the law. So I think, okay, well, this guy is really, he's getting it, and he's making a point, that could be considered vandalism. Until this guy comes back and says, actually, when I got there, he had just pushed the garbage off of his car, and now that guy has littered. So
that was his problem.
So that was his. Now, yeah. So now it's gotten so much deeper, and they're going back and forth and back and forth. And where this thing hits its coup de grace is somebody took that dude and ran a background check, paid to run a background check, and posted the guy's criminal record on this. This comment thread.
The truck owner or
the
guy
truck
who left
owner.
the garbage?
Yeah,
Okay.
the truck owner. Apparently the guy who left the garbage, no one wanted to rattle his cage too much because everyone seemed to agree with him.
He seems
also,
fairly aggressive, so.
Yeah, he also picked up the garbage, by the way. When he came back and saw that the guy had just thrown the garbage onto the ground, he picked it up because he felt, well, I do have some ownership of this garbage, even though I have transferred part of the responsibility to another human being.
You're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, JJ.
But every now and then I get lost in reading one of these things, and I would never comment on it because I don't want to get pulled into the whole conversation. But it is just amazing. And going to the point of running the guy's criminal record, and this guy did. It was, when someone says, oh, a record a mile long, he did. He had aggravated assault, like 4 charges for driving without liability insurance and then driving under suspension. And so is the guy nobody here is in the right. Mm-hmm. That's my point, is that's what the internet has done to us. It has created a 2 wrong situation in almost every major conversation that takes place.
What do you think would have been the correct course of action for the guy who left the garbage on the hood of the truck?
That's a good question. I think that if you see someone who's parked like a D-bag, you can leave a note. And that's about the extent of what you can do.
Because I think about the end of Seinfeld and how they watched that guy get mugged and just stood by and did nothing. I mean, inaction is a choice, and had he not done anything, he would have been condoning the actions of an aggressive, inconsiderate parker.
Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. Of course, you can take a little bit of effort. It's an underground lot, so it's privately owned.
Yeah.
So do you go and do you try and find the person who owns that lot? Maybe they want to get the car towed out of there. Mm-hmm. Or maybe the owner of the lot says, you know what, I really don't care. He paid to park. It's fine. I'll get some other suckers. Maybe someone will show up on a motorcycle and make use of that half spot. But unless we all start taking a serious look at our parking, which we're not, as a nation,
this
parking
will never
is
come
so
together.
low. It's so low on the list. But what I would be afraid about is aggression. People put so much information out there. What if this guy, who now we know has a rap sheet, drives his truck through the front of your house? And when your widow is explaining to the cops, be like, he had gone downstairs and I heard him commenting on Facebook. I heard the click of his iPhone screen go click, 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 click. And the next thing I know, we're up here having a delicious stew dinner. He loves crusty bread, and a truck comes barreling through our front yard.
You've run for public office twice, and this was never part of your platform.
No. Although, you know what happened? So I ran for mayor of the city of Fargo in 2006, and I didn't come in last. I like to tell people that. I spent very little on my campaign. It was all about the issues, and one of the things I decided to run for is there's a park in downtown Fargo. It's called Island Park, and there is a rather busy thoroughfare that goes by, and there's only a 2-way stop. And you need to cross the street to get to a baseball diamond that's a part of this little recreation area. And I always thought, this needs to be a 4-way stop. This is ridiculous. And so I pushed and pushed and pushed. Well, I find out 11 years later, they actually turned it into a 4-way stop. It's about time. So if someone tells you that the government doesn't work, you can tell them, like, it does. It just works slower than you would like.
You just have to run for public office.
Yeah.
To get
and make a
to
case.
get the small municipal change you need made.
I remember when they gave us, there were like 6 people running. Yeah, it was really a 4-horse race. And then 2 other weirdos, myself and an older gentleman named Richard. But they gave us 5 minutes at this one public forum, and I used my 5 minutes to talk about that. And when I sat back down, all the other candidates were looking at me like I was absolutely 100% insane.
You talked about that intersection?
I talked about that intersection. And I said, this is exactly what I'm talking about, is sometimes we get lost in the big problems of the world. We get lost in the fact of, like, well, where are we going to bury the next fiber optic cable? And where are we going to do this? Well, what about the people in that neighborhood, damn it? What about the people who need a 4-way stop? And so I think they had all written me off as being just a crazy kid until Richard, who stood up. Now, Richard, I think, was in his like early 80s when he ran.
And he would run every
He ran a lot of cycles. But his case was not 4-way stop sign, but why don't we finish the Skyway? The Skyway is the key to business success and to revitalize our downtown area. And oddly enough, both of those things that we made such a big deal about are now forefront discussions, making our streets safer, getting that 4-way stop, finishing the Skyway system, and downtown Fargo.
You've done your service. You've done your civic duty, JJ.
I sure have.
It's time to just remain in private life.
How often do you park in a parking garage?
Right now, never. My previous apartment, every
You had a
day.
parking garage?
Yeah.
What about when you go somewhere? Do you park in the parking garage or do you park open air?
In Fargo, that's just not really a thing that happens. There's so much outside of downtown. You can park outside all the time, so parking garages never really happened for me.
I like parking in a parking garage, but I get lost every single time. I go in there and I'm like, where the hell am I supposed to be? We had a mutual friend, Dustin Buchanan, and Dustin one time was in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, taking a motorcycle riding class because he had crashed his motorcycle a couple of times. So I think his parents and his insurance company said, you need to go take this class. And he's bored out of his mind. It's a 5-day course. He says, well, why don't you and Phil, our other friend, come down, and I've got a hotel room. It's right next to the Mall of America. You guys can hang out during the day, and then we'll hang out as a group at night. Sure, why not? It's a free hotel room. It was at the American, and it was a suite. It was nice. So we get
Really
down there.
painted a picture, JJ. I feel like I'm there.
And Dustin drives to the Mall of America. We drive to the Mall of America, and that's where we're going to meet him. And we meet him at Hooters. If you're not familiar with the restaurant Hooters, maybe you live in the area of the country where you have a Twin Peaks or a Crooked Kilt, I believe, is another one, or
Tilted Kilt.
Tilted Kilt, yeah.
Pittsburgh's got those.
The idea is it's a place where you go to objectify women and eat chicken
get
wings.
some chicken wings.
And eat some chicken wings. So we go to this Hooters, and Dustin's already like 3 beers deep, and it's time to go. And I say, well, you can't drive. I will drive your car. Phil, you drive mine. Well, where'd you park, Dustin? I parked in Shrimp Level. Shrimp Level? What the hell is Shrimp Level? And for anyone who's never been to the Mall of America, they separate their parking garage by state. So there's Georgia, and then there's Maryland, and I don't think North Dakota is one of them, or Minnesota, which is weird. But anyway, so you go by the state, and each state has a picture of something that they associate with their state. So I start thinking, what state would associate themselves with a shrimp?
Maine?
So I think it's warmer waters for shrimp.
Okay.
But I don't know. Like
Louisiana?
Like Maine would be lobster. Like you'd have a red lobster right there.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking Louisiana,
Yeah.
maybe Georgia, maybe, there's like something that it's not actually a shrimp, it's like a crawfish or something.
Yeah.
We drive around the Mall of America parking lot for 2.5 hours. The mall is now closed, and we're driving around with Dustin's keys, and I'm hitting the panic button, hoping that we'll just hear like beep, 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 beep. Finally, after 2.5 hours, we locate his car. He had parked next to a shrimp. It was a cowboy boot. It was Texas. He parked next to a cowboy boot that in his mind he was just so not paying attention and had gotten to that perfect stage of buzz where he confused a cowboy boot with spurs for a shrimp. Oh, I was mad. I was so mad. And that brings me to my guest today, Kevin Kennedy. It does.
Does it?
Does.
I
does.
can't wait to see how this brings us to Kevin.
And I'll tell you why. Kevin Kennedy is one of the most detailed guys I've ever met in my entire life. If you tell Kevin, where did we park, he would tell you things like this. Well, I remember seeing the D from the Nordstrom's light up sign. We were in this level at this parking spot. It was 28 steps till we got there. And don't remember, there's a giant bubblegum shrimp thing plastered at the entrance. And when we walked in, we immediately saw that bathroom with the out of order sign. And according to the map, he just notices everything.
Wow.
He's one of those guys who you can't get anything by him. So if you say, oh, my, if you're trying to like lie to him and you're trying to say like, oh, my hand hurts. And then he sees you use that hand to pick something up later. He goes, oh, your hand hurts, huh?
What is he, Sherlock Holmes?
He's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes, but he doesn't use that for good. He only uses it to shame people in many ways. But I got to meet Kevin Kennedy years ago. He's got the great ability to talk to anybody. It doesn't matter. He'll seek out conversation anywhere he goes, and he's not afraid to talk to people. I remember the night that we had Stephen Tobolowsky in Fargo. He did just no fanboy aspect. Just immediately says, "Well, where in Hollywood do you guys live?" "Oh yeah. And you got a turtle?" Yeah, we have a turtle, and don't you find like turtles are weird like this? And then they just get into these random tangent conversations. So I meet Kevin Kennedy one night. He came out to a Linebenders show and brought a bunch of high school kids with him from his high school troupe. And we sat at Spicy Pie and talked for 4.5 hours until they actually told us, you need to leave. You're not even getting the social hints we've been giving you by putting the chairs up. You need to leave and leave now. And from there, it's been a wonderful relationship. He's someone that I can talk to about just about anything, and a huge baseball fanatic. We go all over the place on this podcast, but what I think people are really going to enjoy here is Kevin's an educator and has educated in both public and private schools, and we get his opinion on gun violence in schools. And it's probably one of the best thought out and eloquent takes that I've heard in a very long time.
I think it's important for people our age and older who, I graduated in 2003, so it's been forever since I was in high school. And when I was in junior high school was when Columbine happened, and there were school shootings happening. But at no point did I feel like that affected the tone of going to school, the idea of going to school. And when we were talking to Kevin, it really showed me that I am really far removed from what high school used to be, that things have changed drastically. So I think it's really important for people our age and older to listen to teachers and students from today that are going to class every single day, and how safe they feel, and what their opinion is of people who are outside of the system that they're in, and pass judgment very quickly on what the solutions should be. So yeah, I think it's interesting. And plus, Kevin has a very interesting sort of path through Hollywood.
Yeah, if you happen to look at the image associated with this podcast, you'll know that there's a Drop Dead Fred reference. We'll get into that. It's a lot of fun. So strap yourselves in. This is going to be a good one. It's JJ Meets World with our special guest Kevin Kennedy.
JJ Meets World.
We'd like to welcome our guest, Kevin Kennedy, to the studio. Kevin, I've known you for a few years now.
That's right.
And let's let the folks know exactly who you are and what you do.
I'm an English and drama teacher at Fargo South High School here in Fargo, and I direct all the shows. So that's, in a nutshell, what I do now.
And you're not from this region originally. You've kind of been all over the place. One thing that really interests me is you spent a lot of time in Chicago.
Yep.
And you came up with some pretty heavy hitters in the comedy world. You did some Second City work out there. So tell me about your improv career and how it progressed.
I was late to the improv game. I went to college at Notre Dame. I grew up in Minneapolis. Really wanted to go to Notre Dame. My dream was to be a professional football player like every 10-year-old kid. That obviously didn't work out because none of you have ever heard of me as a football player. Went to Notre Dame, realized that football was not going to happen pretty quickly, then became a theater major, loved it, thought I would just do the theater and acting thing. Moved to L.A. after graduation, hated L.A., awful place. Moved back. It's funny because I moved back to Minneapolis and I got film work almost immediately when I moved back to Minneapolis. But the improv thing, then I moved to Chicago because of a girl.
How'd that work out?
She's married to someone else.
Okay.
And has kids that are in college.
So it worked out really well. is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yes. It worked out well.
Dodged a huge bullet.
But when I got to Chicago is when I discovered improv. So I was 20, I don't know, this is 1990, and I'd never seen an improv show before. So I was 23, 24, something like that. And I went to my first improv. I saw a show at Second City, and they do an improv set at the end of the show. And like I tell my students all the time, it's like the first time you see it, it's like magic. You can't believe that this is what it is, that this works this way. Immediately got enrolled in classes at Players Workshop down there, which I think is defunct now. I'm not sure if it's still open. And then got into the Second City training program, and then immediately started taking classes at Improv Olympia, it was called back in the old days.
Before it became Improv Olympic and then IO.
IO, which it is now, which is weird
because the
to me.
World Olympic Committee sent them a cease and desist letter.
Yeah, and I don't know why she didn't stay with Improv Olympia. She probably hated it. I don't know, but it's now AIO, which is
Because they got a cease and desist letter from a extra virgin olive oil company called Olympia.
that's probably true. But what I hit it at the right window. I was early 90s, 90 to 92. I was in Chicago, and it was just in the sort of infant stage. Improv was, at least in there at Improv Olympic, and it was. So I trained with Sharna Halpern, who owns Improv Olympic IO. And then Del Close was, after you took the first class, he taught all the upper level classes. So I took him for, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that. It was quite interesting. And then the interesting thing was that I auditioned for Second City, didn't get in, moved back to Minneapolis, and immediately got into Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop, which started at the same time as Second City.
So you've been in big ponds
Yep.
where you've been a small fish.
Yep.
And you just moved to smaller ponds
Yeah.
and become a bigger fish along the way.
That's actually a good way of putting it. I didn't really think of that. Yeah, and then the fact that I ended up in Fargo was just one of those serendipitous things. And most people don't know this, but Fargo has an amazing theater community up here. And bumped into you at Spicy Pie, and we talked till 2 a.m., and you invited me to a rehearsal, and before you knew it, I was in the troupe.
So full disclosure, my good friend Phil Goodell was going for the same job Kevin was.
He was.
And so when I first met Mr. Kennedy, my first thought was, who's this joker? He doesn't deserve this job.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I thought I'd have all this influence on my high school theater program at the age of 27, 28.
Yeah.
And it turns out that you're just the man for the job. So
The funny thing about that was when I got to know both you and Phil, I felt extreme guilt over that I felt like I took his job. So I spent the next 2 years, actually next 4 years, trying to get him a job,
Yeah.
which I finally did last year, and I got him a job in the district. So he's got a really good job.
good. You've really harnessed your Midwest guilt.
Yes,
there.
yeah, I feel guilty.
So you told me a pretty interesting story one time when I told you that my significant other's favorite movie is a forgotten film from the 90s called Drop Dead Fred.
Drop Dead Fred, yes.
Featuring Carrie Fisher, Phoebe Cates, and I can't remember the name of the guy.
Rick Mayall.
Rick Mayall.
Yeah, he
who
died
was-
recently, yeah.
He was supposed to be in all the Harry Potter movies as one of the ghosts, but they kept cutting his role every single time. So I think he got residuals for it because he
Oh,
shot
really?
it, but he just never ended up. So Drop Dead Fred, if you've never seen it, is just a horrible, horrible movie.
Gene Siskel rated it the worst movie of 1991, I think.
Yeah.
And it was.
But you've got a credit on it.
I do. I am actually okay, so I was living in L.A. I moved back to my sister was getting married, so I moved back for the wedding. The wedding happens, and literally I moved back. I came back on a Friday. She got married on Saturday. And on Monday morning, my uncle calls me, who was a Teamster, calls me, goes, and at like 9 o'clock, he goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was sleeping." And he says, "Would you want to work?" And I go, "Sure, doing what?" And he goes, "Driving a truck." So I had to be at the place in a half an hour. I got up, threw some clothes on, drove over there, and they hired me on the spot. And I drove a truck on a movie set on Drop Dead Fred, which was being filmed in Minneapolis. So I got film work, not film work, but worked on a movie.
Production,
Yeah.
work. You can be proud of
in
it.
Minneapolis when I couldn't get any work. I couldn't buy work in L.A., which was great because the old store, the old saying is true that the most interesting day of your life is your first day on a movie set, and the most boring day of your life is the second day on a movie set. That is really true.
What was your credit? Was it like best boy truck driver?
No, I was so at transportation. So my uncle Mike Kennedy was like transportation captain or something like that. And there's a whole bunch of us. There's like 10 of us or something like that. And I'm the last person enlisted. So you have to watch all the way to the end of the credits to find my name.
So you're right above no animals were harmed in the making of this motion picture.
Actually, no, there's nothing after my name. So, yeah. I've actually had to force people to sit all the way through that awful movie just to see my name. Yeah, it's awful. It's pretty bad. You know what, though? I got the best. That movie, there was a day where we were driving down to Paisley Park which is Prince's studio down in Eden Prairie. And it's from the hotel where the actors were staying, it's 45 minutes. And so I was driving a van, and I picked up Rick Mayall. Now, for those of you who don't know who Rick Mayall is, I didn't know who he was when I worked on that movie. I'd never heard of him before. But I had a British friend when I was in Chicago, and I was telling him about this movie, and I told him about driving Rick Mayall around, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He goes, Do you have any idea who that is? And I go, No, I don't. And he goes, He's the Steve Martin of England. And so this is before the internet, so there was no way to really look him up or anything like that. But then over the years, I did start to look him up, and he was pretty famous. At the time he was on, at the time of the movie, he had 2 television shows, 2 situation comedies on TV at the same time.
Yeah, this is supposed to be his big break into American audiences.
American movies, yeah. And so I happened to get in a car, take him down to Paisley Park to shoot for the day, and it's just him and I in this van for 45 minutes. And we're driving, and he's sitting in the front chatting. He's not pulling the movie star thing on me. He's just all excited about America. And we start talking, about this girl that I'm dating. And I go on for a while, and he goes, Can I give you a piece of advice that my father gave me? And I said, Sure. And I was, let's see, it would have been 90, so I'd have been 23, 24 at the time. He goes, My father told me don't marry somebody in your early 20s. Wait till your late 20s, because when you're in your late 20s, you'll be the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. And then you won't have to change, because the person that meets you will love you for who you are. And I thought, that's interesting. So I moved to Chicago for this girl and realized that was a huge mistake. And he was right. So when I moved back to Minneapolis a couple years later, I dated a bunch of different people, and I kept going, yeah, this isn't the right person for me. And his advice was absolutely right. And I give that advice to all my students, by the way. Most of them ignore it, but...
You want to know what the worst part of that movie was, though?
What?
It was the truck driving.
Yeah, probably.
It's the worst part of that movie.
You could tell there were production delays up and down.
Here's what people need to
right.
know about working on a movie set as a truck driver. It's okay. It's awful. That's the first thing. It's literally sit around and wait. That's what all movie sets are. You're bored out of your mind. But here's the deal: you're the first one to the set because you got to get all the production people there, and you're the last one to leave. So the transportation guys work. If everybody else is working a 16-hour day, you're working an 18-hour day. That's the worst part. But it is. You're not allowed to take a nap. You don't do anything for 5 straight hours, but they don't want you taking a nap. So the transpo captain's walking around looking at you like, don't fall asleep. And of course, you're sitting in vans, stuff like that. There's only so many times you can walk to the craft services table and get a candy bar or a bag of chips or something like that. It's so boring. But the biggest thing was trying to stay awake. So one time it was a cold day. We were down at Paisley Park shooting, and I'm sitting in the front of the van. We all piled into my passenger van because it was raining. It was cold outside. Usually, it was nice. It was the summer, so we're all sitting. I'm sitting in the driver's seat. Somebody else is sitting in the passenger seat, and all the guys from LA and stuff that are transpo guys are sitting in the back, right? And we're sitting there, for like 4 hours, and I dozed off, and I didn't realize it. Somebody comes up and knocks on the window, and all of a spring, like we'd never been sleeping, but everybody in the van had been sleeping, including my captain, who told me never to fall asleep. So yeah, it's like must be like security guard work. It's awful. So,
You think being a security guard is awful? Thanks.
Well-
We just lost a huge demo.
Well, my brother was a security guard for a while, and he says it's the battle of staying awake.
So to put Drop Dead Fred in perspective, Phoebe Cates, hot off of Gremlins 2, the new batch, in 1990, she had also just started dating Kevin Kline, and
Kevin
I
Kline,
think
yeah.
they got married shortly after. He must have advised her because she only has 2 other movie credits.
Yeah, she kind of gave up the game after that.
She did, and I think she wanted to become a mother and devote herself to that. And
Yeah.
I mean, if your husband's Kevin Kline, you might as well let him bring home the bacon.
She, the interesting thing was I drove her around a few times. Beautiful, beautiful woman. Still is, actually. I think she has a boutique store in New York or something like that.
Yeah.
Kevin Kline came to the set one day, and the thing that kind of sort of struck me is he's a good deal older than her. I don't know what.
A real
but,
September, December relationship.
yeah, but he showed up, and gosh, it must have been after Fish Called Wanda. So he was, but he was a pretty famous actor, Big Chill and things like that. So I knew who, everybody knew who he was, and he kind of kept to himself and followed her around a little bit. Everybody knew Phoebe Cates from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, of course.
Yeah. Oh, she had a bunch of really great roles. In
Yeah.
fact, I don't think people give her credit for her comedic chops.
Yeah.
But in Gremlins 2, The New Batch, they force her to parody a speech she gives in Gremlins about her dad being Santa Claus and breaking his neck coming down the chimney, dying, and they find the body like 8 days later.
Yeah.
And they have her parody it by talking about being accosted by a man who looked just like Abe Lincoln on President's Day.
Wow.
And it's one of those moments where I don't think people give her credit enough because she nails it. She really gets that parody perfect.
Yeah,
And she's funny in Fast Times, too.
She is. She's great in that movie. I don't know. I think my sense is she got married to Kevin Kline and just wanted to start a family. And he was doing the acting thing and supporting them. And because he did a lot of stage work, too, in New York. And so good for her, The movie was still awful. She was beautiful, but the movie was awful. And it stuns me that you and your significant other love that movie.
Oh, yeah. And she...
Yeah.
Dude, you would not be so. Dude, you need to. Oh my God, I'm surprised that this is already coming up, JJ. JJ and I, the only time that JJ and I's friendship almost ended was right after we watched Lady in the Water by M. Night Shyamalan, and we went to Applebee's right after that and had probably the nastiest fight we've ever had. That ended with me dismissing JJ's opinions by saying, "Yeah, well, you liked Captain Ron."
To which I still
So
do,
he
by
liked
the
M.
way.
Night Shyamalan's movie, and you hated it?
I hated it.
Ah.
He loved it.
Yeah, you have a strange
I do.
interest in various things, which I find interesting.
Sometimes it's nice to just buck the trend.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fun to be that person who says, well, for example, there's a great Martin Short article from GQ magazine where they start talking about his flop movie Clifford.
Mm-hmm.
And he stops the interview, and they included it in the piece, and he says, if you go to any dormitory in the entire United States, I guarantee you'll find 10 copies of Clifford on people's shelves. He goes, it is an underground little miniature cult classic that will never get midnight showings. It'll never it'll never be something that people talk about on a yearly basis and celebrate Clifford Day with a watching of it. But he said it is available in every bargain bin in every single department store.
Wow.
You've made it when you're in the 2-for-1 at Walmart.
Right.
Yeah. You're famous.
So he says, even though you're dismissing it, a lot of people have seen it. So, and I think the same goes for Drop Dead Fred. Tucker, you've seen Drop Dead Fred, right?
Yeah.
So really, we're talking about a movie that we've all three seen, that the listener's saying, oh yeah, I remember, I had TBS growing up. I've seen Drop Dead Fred.
Yeah. The real measure of this podcast's reach will be if Drop Dead Fred viewings go up in some measurable way after this.
Yeah.
This has been brought to you by New Line Cinema's 1991 classic Drop Dead Fred, featuring Phoebe Cates and
Rick Mayall and
Carrie Fisher.
Carrie Fisher.
Truck driving by...
You know who else was in that? Was is it? No, not Diane Wiest. No, Marsha Mason.
Yeah.
Was in that. She played the mother.
The mother.
And she had just come off. One of my heroes as a kid growing up was Clint Eastwood. I love Clint Eastwood movies, still do. And she had just come off doing Heartbreak Ridge with him. And the fact that I was 1 degree of separation from Clint Eastwood was so fascinating to me. And I drove her around one day, and I was just, I didn't care about anything she'd done. I just started peppering her with Clint Eastwood questions. And all she could really say was like, oh, yeah, he was a real professional, and he was great to work with. That was basically it.
You've got a great ability, and I've been in situations where you've been around celebrities, people you really respect, Joe anybody's. But you've got a great ability to have a conversation with anybody, anywhere, about any subject. And it's really, I don't know if you check in with yourself on that enough, but like it's really impressive to me because every now and then I'll kind of clam up and I won't want to have something. But we had an event where we brought in Stephen Tobolowsky this last fall, and you and he were old pals by the end of it.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, trading phone numbers, and kicking each other under the table,
Planning vacations together.
Yeah. Oh, come check out your bees.
It's funny. My dad was that way. He just would ask the question that everybody wanted to know, but no one wanted to ask. And I'm not really a fan, celebrity gawker. That doesn't impress me that you're a celebrity. I'm more curious about your personal story, how you got to where you are. So when I meet people like that, I'm like, okay, you did this. Wow, what was that like? And rather than like, can I have I don't care about autographs. I have Willie Nelson's autograph. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
How did that come to be?
I went to a Willie Nelson concert. I've seen him twice in concert. By the way, if you get a chance to see him before he dies, because he might live forever.
People have been saying that since 1995.
Yeah. But he is 80. He's born in 32, so that makes him 86 this year. He's old, but he's still on the road 200 nights. The guy is a machine.
He's really testing the anti-cancer properties of marijuana.
Yeah.
So
Oh, by the way,
really
he quit smoking marijuana. He now
Eats it?
No,
Vaporizes it?
Vaporizes it. Yeah. So I don't know anything about marijuana, but if that's better for the lungs or whatever. But yeah, he had to stop smoking it because of problems and stuff like that. But
He's a master at card tricks too.
Oh yeah, yep, and dirty jokes.
Oh,
he
there
tells
you go.
really, really raunchy, dirty jokes. They kind of leak out into the public sometimes. But I went to a concert of his twice. I've seen him twice, and the first time I went with my wife. We were newly married, and so this would have been the '90s. And I've always been I was kind of, but the old Barbara Mandrell song is I was country when country wasn't cool. It's very true of me. I grew up in Prince country in Minneapolis, so in the '80s. It was everything Prince. People walking around in the ruffle shirt with purple on and stuff like that, and the Prince hairdo and stuff. Right at Michael Jackson's height, there was a pocket of Prince fans, of course, in Minneapolis because he was from there. And I like Prince, and I still do, but I was never a huge Prince fan the way my friends were. But I really liked Willie Nelson. I discovered Willie Nelson in 8th grade, and I was like, this is... But you couldn't listen to Willie Nelson publicly, and where I was growing up, I would have been laughed out of the state. So I used to listen to him secretly in my room. I'd play Willie Nelson records really low, so only I could hear it. My brother, who was into punk rock, wouldn't ridicule me. And then I took my wife to a concert in the 90s. My wife's a massive Van Halen fan, and I take him to Willie Nelson at Mystic Lake Casino in Plymouth, Minnesota. And she is a huge Eddie Van Halen fan, loves guitar solos and stuff like that. Well, she didn't know that Willie Nelson is he's an amazing guitar player. A lot of people don't know that. And she was sitting there watching him just shred his acoustic guitar with the holes in it people have seen.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah, and she was like, what is this? And I go, yeah, that's how he plays. She goes, why isn't this on the albums? This is great. And she became a fan after that. And then a couple years later, he came back, and I saw it with a good friend of mine, Ben. And right after the concert, he says, "Good, thank you, good night." He starts to walk off. This is like a 3,000-seat venue. He starts to walk off, and somebody rushes the stage and waves something for him to sign, and he walks over and signs it. The second he does that, people just start rushing the stage. I'm not kidding. He signed autographs for an hour and a half. And I was there, and I was just standing there watching him 10 feet away. He was standing on the edge of the stage and handing people were getting whatever they could to get signed. And I just handed my ticket stub. And this is my one moment of being a completely stupid fan. I had his album Across the Borderline, which I think is a great album. And I'm sitting there, and I go, I really like your album Across the Borderline. He goes, oh, thanks. And I go, you should play more of that music in concert. He goes, okay. And that was it. Complete moronic moment by me.
Went back to the bus and said, you guys, we got to rethink our set list. Kevin Kennedy, the driver from Drop Dead Fred, I just ran into him. I was gonna sign a ticket stub for him, but I had him sign my guitar instead, so I'd have his autograph.
He's a real tastemaker. I can't remember when it was recorded, but there's a live concert with Nelson and Johnny Cash.
Okay.
And it's like a really intimate setting, so it must have been for TV or something. And there's this great moment where Johnny Cash hands his guitar that he was playing over to Willie Nelson because he's just going to sing on something. And Nelson just starts noodling on the guitar, and Cash stops and watches him do it and then goes, that's the first time that guitar has truly been played in 40 years.
Yeah.
Because Cash wasn't really known as a guitarist. He was a singer. And he could do some bass. Hands it over to Nelson, and Nelson's just making beautiful music come out of that. So that's how good of a guitarist he was. He made Johnny Cash stop and just listen.
He's an amazing guitar player, and he has his own sort of. He's got a weird style of singing. He does what they call back phrasing, which means he doesn't keep the tempo. But he kind of talks and then sings through his stuff. I love his songwriting is amazing. I'm a huge Willie Nelson fan.
I think he's a good actor too.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's very funny when he pops up in certain things, and he usually plays himself. There's an episode of the television show Monk where Willie Nelson is accused of murder.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Monk has to solve the crime so that Willie Nelson won't go to jail.
Won't go to jail. When I discovered him, a forgotten movie was, and this really dates me. I was in 8th grade, and my 8th grade science teacher on the last day of school had a VHS tape, and he had a tape of, I think it came out in 1978, was Electric Horseman with Robert Redford and Jane Fonda, and I think it's a great movie. One of these movies no one ever remembers, no one ever mentions in either of their careers, but Willie Nelson plays like an aide to. And Willie Nelson wrote the soundtrack for that movie. He wrote a bunch of songs in it, and that's where I first heard him. I'm like, this is the greatest music ever written, and so that's where I discovered him. And I was probably 13 years old or whatever.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
I want to take a pretty hard shift in this conversation real quick. The recent events in Florida with a school shooting has brought up a lot of questions about what we should be doing to help prevent school shootings. One of the things that's been brought up is maybe we should be arming and training teachers. And I'm curious to know, as an educator working today, what you think of that. So let's say we live in a world where that's an option presented to you by the district you work in. They said, gosh, you get a 2% pay bump, plus you get a school-issued firearm. You just have to go through training. Do you think, as an educator, you would take on that role?
Absolutely not. We talked about it at lunch the other day. I don't know of one teacher that would. I'm sure there are teachers out there that would. But the idea, there's so many problems that people haven't thought of. You're completely surrounded by kids. And imagine having a gun on your hip, and that's one more thing you have to think about at all times. I can't conceive of, and some people say, well, you'd have it in a lockbox stationed in the various parts of the building or whatever, and you'd have access to get to it. Well, okay. I mean, I still think that's an awful idea. I just think adding more guns to the thing is just a recipe for more bullets being fired. And we have a police liaison officer in our school that does a very good job. And it's funny, after that, I was walking behind her in the hallway just yesterday, actually, and I was looking at the, I suppose it's a 9. I don't know anything about guns, but I think it was a 9mm on her hip there. And I thought, wow, I'm 2 feet behind her, and what it would take nothing for me to just reach and grab that thing. Or a student, now she has a full uniform on. She's there in a very different role. She walks in a different way because she's very conscious of her role there. She's very good with the kids, but also she's there as law enforcement. To wear those two hats would be almost impossible. I can't conceive of it.
I went to school in a time when computers started being actually introduced into the classroom, so it wasn't just a computer lab. And I watched educators struggle with how to get something to print.
Oh, yeah.
And you had countless hours of, classes for that. So to me, the thought of arming teachers and then adding that training on top of it doesn't make me feel real great.
And no teacher that I've personally talked to, or I've looked at a lot of threads on the internet, wants to do that. Like I said, I'm sure there are some out there. But I just, it's insane. It's insane to add. We're going to add that on top. And I just think of, the moments, a lot of things that people don't realize is we break up our share of fights. A kid takes a swing at another kid, or two kids are bumping chests and screaming at each other. That happens all the time. Now, in my 17 years, I've probably broken up 40 fights. And probably 30 some of them, you just do it with your voice. You yell a little bit, you're jumping. But I've seen fights where a teacher got in the middle of it, jumped in between the two kids, and the fists still are flying, and they get tagged. Now imagine a gun on your hip, and you jump between those people, and that thing either goes off or gets loose or somebody grabs for it. It's insane. It's insane. So I can't conceive of how that would make the situation better.
I think of even, I know it's a very simplistic way to think about it, but I think of like a play. If I go to see a play, if you're in the audience watching a play and suddenly a character pulls out a gun, right, that changes the circumstances of the situation.
Yeah.
Immediately, just by the presence of it, an escalation happens, and everyone reacts to it. Whether or not you are a fan of guns or not, you understand what that thing right there means. You're escalating a situation. So, JJ and I have both gone through the public school system. We're aware of how that's already a really tense situation. So it seems like it would be a really bad turn to suddenly introduce these things that escalate situations even more just by them being there, especially when you've got a crowded room of people. When the shooting happened in Vegas not too long ago, there were a few people who I know out in Vegas who knew people that were there that went home to get their guns and drove back there. And I thought, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, because if you have a gunman who you don't know where they're coming from, and then all these people just start firing at what they think are the gunmen, your body count's going to go way up.
And not only that, the perfect example is the Gabby Giffords thing, when the representative in Arizona that was shot a couple years back. She was outside a grocery store, and the guy came up and started shooting, and some bystanders tackled the guy, got the gun away from him, and one of the guys was holding the gun. But there was a guy inside the store that was in concealed carry, heard the gunshots, runs out there with his gun drawn, sees the guy with the gun in his hand. It was the guy that took it away, and he said, I was within split seconds of shooting that guy. So, because he didn't know what was going on. He thought he was the shooter, and he wasn't. And so this guy, being a good Samaritan, could have shot another good Samaritan right there. And plus, bullets start flying. You don't know where they're going to land. It's insane.
Do you feel safe in your school?
I do feel safe, but I understand that the system, and I mean the school-wide, I don't mean Fargo Public specifically, I mean all schools, are porous enough that a determined person could come into pretty much any school and get by the security pretty quickly, because the nature of it is it's not like a prison where you have to go through 5 layers of security, or the airport where you got to go through all these layers of security to get into the interior. They can't be that way because people are coming for games and shows and speakers, and there's
it's a public building.
It's a public building, exactly. And so you can't, if you made it that way, like you would the airport, people would just stop going there for other reasons. And plus you have 1,000 kids coming and going at all hours of the day. We have an open campus, meaning kids can leave for lunch. We have proctors, people stationed at the doors, but a person could come and just shoot them and just start wander freely through the building.
I walk into a lot of schools just for various speaking things, and just because I end up knowing a lot of educators. And they've got a system in place where you check in, at the main office for most schools.
Yep.
Like I know at Fargo South, they've got someone positioned at the main doors but that person, you sign a piece of paper, you stick a name tag on, and you're on your way. Or you go and you talk to Gladys in the office. Yeah. And her concern is that you get the right time on the sheet for what time you've arrived there. Yeah. And by no fault of their own, but they're being put in the position of being the gatekeeper to this school. Unfortunately, what we see more often than not is somebody who's actually a student at the school or is ingrained there. It's not just a random person. walking in for the most part, and it's a very scary idea to me. And school shootings have been scary. This last week, I had the thought of Tucker and I are almost the same age, and Columbine took place when we were in the middle school,
I think it was
early high
99,
school.
wasn't
It was
it?
99.
Yeah.
I know that
And-
date specifically. Yeah.
I watched those students at the town hall get up and speak, and boy were they eloquent, and they put together a great message. And I thought to myself, I was their age when Columbine took place. And I'm now an adult. I've voted in many elections since then. I've had friends who've been part of the political process. I've had friends who've been part of influence.
You ran for mayor
parties.
once.
I ran for mayor and didn't come in last. But but gun control and the subject of school shootings has never come up. So I feel like I have let down the current generations by not remembering and taking action as I got older. But that's something that we see kind of across the board is people forget. The news cycle now will pick up something in a little
yeah.
bit.
It'll be forgotten in a week.
How much did you talk about the Las Vegas shooting a month after that?
Oh yeah, hardly at all. And that was 15. Isn't that the number one in terms of body count? 59 people or something like that. Yeah, I maybe we should arm Gladys at the front office. Maybe she's the answer. I don't know. The thing is, you're right. It's usually somebody inside the system, a student, a current student, or at least a former student that's recent. Because some kid that's 35 is not going, Mr. Smith in English class, I hated him, and go back to school, shoot up the school. It's usually a kid inside the system, and so they know all the flaws. Because even in my building where we have people at the doors, if there are two people involved, somebody could easily open another door, and let a person in, and they wouldn't know about it. And it's not like somebody's sitting at a bank of monitors watching every person that comes through the door. We don't have that, and most schools don't. So I don't know. It's luck in a lot of ways, and teachers talk about that, and we don't. I'm surprised it hasn't happened in North Dakota yet, that we haven't had a shooting in this state. I'm from Minnesota. We've had a couple in Minnesota. Actually, one that I did one of my student teaching gigs at Cold Spring had a shooting there a couple years after. I didn't know any of the kids, but I knew some teachers there, and they were just some of them left the profession. They couldn't deal with it anymore, and some were just like, it just changes everything about the profession and the school and the district.
When I was in first grade, I was held at knife point by an older student.
Whoa.
Yeah, on the
First grade?
playground. Yeah. I was hanging out with my friend after school. We went to Claire Barton, which has a creative arts studio attached to it, and his mom was teaching a class there, so we were hanging out on the playground. And an older student pinned us into how they used to take big tractor tires and pretend like that was playground equipment.
Yep.
So we were in a circle of those, and he held us in there, and he pulled out one of the larger Swiss Army knives.
Yep.
And put it to my throat, and then put it to my friend's chest, and our custodian, a guy that everyone just called Ryan, and I will never forget his face. He was a younger guy. He had glasses, pretty ripped for a custodian.
Yep.
Came out, saw this, picked the kid up by the collar of his shirt, and physically separated us, and took the knife away from the kid. And then the kid ran, and asked us if we were all right. We said we were. And when you're 6, you understand that something's happening, but I didn't really understand.
Yeah, you don't.
Life and death aspect of that. And then the next day, I got called into the principal's office, and my teacher, Mrs. Kolstad, hugged me and said, "You just need to tell them what you remember happened."
Wow.
And I remember that kid sitting in the office, and the kid got. I know he was suspended, but he might have been expelled. But at that point, it was just the principal, his parents, and then the two of us. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't one of these situations where the school board gets involved and there's
newspapers
committees,
there,
and everything like that. And it wasn't until a little later on in life that I kind of understood the severity of what was going on. And I don't think that this kid wanted to hurt us. I think he wanted a laugh. He wanted some power.
Sure.
He wanted to, he didn't even realize what he was doing.
Being the big kid on the playground, yeah.
And I've always wondered what happened to him.
What grade was he?
He was a 5th grader.
Okay, yeah, so picking on some first graders.
Well, dude, if you're listening, you can track JJ
Yeah.
down pretty easily these days.
yeah, he's everywhere.
Kevin, I have a question.
Sure.
How do you guys talk to your students about this topic? Because clearly, it affects them very much so, and if anything, they might find themselves in a position to be more proactive about these things. Because, like you said, it's often a student or a former student that most of them might know. Do you guys have conversations like this with your students, and how does that happen?
We do, and I've reported kids a couple times. My first year teaching, a girl walked. It was the 3rd week of school, maybe it was pretty early on. A girl walks through the door, and she's saying to a friend of hers, she goes, "Yeah, I was with so and so, and her locker was next to this girl. It wasn't a girl I had in class, but I knew who she was." And she goes, "Yeah, I was standing next to her, and she was talking to her other friend about this hit list that she had, and she was showing it to this other friend, and this girl in my class saw it over her shoulder." And she was a little freaked out about it, but she was kind of joking about it to the friend. And I pulled her aside, and I was like, "What was going on?" She goes, she just tells me about it, and to kind of not think it's a big deal. And I made sure I identified the girl. And I literally just walked out of my classroom, walked right down and walked right into the principal's office. The principal was doing something, and I walked right in, and I sat down, and I said, "You need to know this." And I told her the girl's name. I told her everything. I said, she didn't even say a word to me. She didn't even say, "Hi, Kevin," or anything like that. She stood up and walked out the door. That was it. Got all of my information, walked out the door, and the girl was no longer there. She was gone that day. So one of the flaws in the system is that to the other kids in the school, unless rumors go around, that girl just is no longer there, and they don't know why. And we don't talk about that, especially as the administration, because we're worried about laws and confidentiality and all that stuff. So we don't even, often kids are just disappear, they're gone, and sometimes they move away or something. But sometimes it's a discipline thing. They've been taken out because of whatever reason. But we as teachers often don't know the reason why. And had we known or kind of kept an eye on a kid, you don't want this oppressive thing where we got to worry about this kid. But you want to know. I mean, you want to know what you're working amongst. And the kids know before you do. Wait, that's one thing you learn. Now, the problem is 80% of it is rumor and 20% of it is real, and you've got to sort of sift through that. Otherwise, you're constantly down in the office saying, "Oh, I heard this and I heard that, I heard this and I heard that." So you've got to feel some of it. And I have a pretty good relationship with the kids, so I'll talk to them and find out what they're saying. But I've reported anything you can conceive of, I've reported. And there's been various levels of action taken, from kids being removed to kids getting counseling to parents intervening. You just don't know. But I'm quite surprised there aren't more school shootings, to be honest with you.
You've also have the perspective of working in a private school system and a public school system. Do you have any feeling one way or the other? I know that statistics weigh that public school shootings are much more common.
Yes,
than
and there's a reason
at
why.
Private schools.
Yeah, there's an absolute reason why. So I've worked in a boarding school. I've worked in a Catholic school. I've worked in a small town school. I've worked in a big suburban school. I've worked in a big urban school. So I've worked in a variety of types of schools. So I've kind of seen it all. The difference that a private school has is they don't have to take everybody. And you don't realize how much of an advantage that is. So think of taking my school, which has got 1,000 kids, and just lopping off the bottom 200. That would be the equivalent of a private school. They just don't have to suffer the lower range of kids, but also the troublesome kids. Those things, they just don't. They just get rid of them. And that was the case when I was at that. I told you that story about the girl, and that was at a private school. But the public school can't do that. Now, can we do things better? Yes. When I was at Fridley, we had a 2 strikes and you're out policy for fighting. And I remember a senior girl that got in a fight with another girl the week of graduation. and she got expelled 4 days before graduation. Now, she still got her diploma, but they yanked her out. They put her at the ALC, and she didn't get to walk at graduation. But they didn't mess around with that. There was other schools thinking like, oh, well, it was a minor fight or whatever. And I've been in school districts where there is no place to send them, so we're kind of caught you just have to accept everybody. And so what do you do with that when you put all the people in the same cage, as it were?
Yeah, my dad was a public school teacher for 30 plus years, and I've heard him say this multiple times because he's broken up hundreds, if not thousands, of fights over his career. And he said if he had to pick a fight that day that he was going to break up, either between two male students or two female students, he would go to break up the male students one.
Absolutely.
Any day of the week, because oftentimes with young teenage boys, it's bluster.
Yep.
They're going to shove each other a bit. Maybe a punch or two gets thrown, but they're showing off more than anything.
Yep.
Men tend to fight because of vanity.
Oh yeah.
Versus two female students who just want to kill each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's going to be blood. They're going to maybe use a chair that's next to them. They're not fighting for vanity or to look cool. They literally want to kill that person.
That is true. I actually have a saying on that guys fight to look cool, girls fight to win. And I agree with your dad 100%. I would break up a guy fight 9 times out of 9, but girl fights, and usually you can break up a fight with your voice. I was at a school. I've seen full on weaves getting pulled out of a girl's hair with roots and blood on the end of the weave, and the weave was thrown in the girl's face. I saw that. Yeah, but it was
really
brutal.
Shouldn't be laughing. I'm sorry.
I saw at one of the schools that I'll let remain nameless. We had these two girls were having a Facebook war and all this stuff, and it blew up beyond their friends, and the administration and the faculty got wind of it a little bit late. So this sort of fight broke out between all their friends because they got the two girls aside, but these friends. So then it was like a full-on 10-on-10 sort of situation. And the assistant principal, a 35-year-old, very capable woman, these two girls are throwing punches, and she makes the mistake of jumping between them and kind of starts to pull them apart. And one of the girls is going to come up over the top of the assistant principal to punch the other girl in the face and misses and cold cocks the assistant principal hard. And she drops to her knees. I didn't see this, but, we got to I was in my room, and they went out over the thing. It was like an all-call sort of thing. And it wasn't a lockdown. It wasn't that situation, but it was. So I hear all this noise, and we're trained to, you hear noise in the hallway, you got to go see what it is. And a lot of times it's just kids screaming, but you got to, because you don't know what's going to happen. And I've seen enough fights. And I got to the doorway, and I look out in the doorway, and I had a bunch of freshmen, and I just happened to have my hands in the frame of the doorway, and I look out, and I don't see anything because it was down around the corner. Next thing I know, I'm getting pushed from behind because 25 kids are trying to get out in the hallway, and they're all pushing on me. And I said, anybody that goes through the doorway fails the course.
Oh.
And they all backed off, and I shut the door. And the fight ended up involving like 30-some students. 7 kids were sent to jail. It was crazy. And so it kind of built and built and built. And the police were called. 7 police officers showed up, all this stuff. And we saw none of it because my kids stayed in my room, and I taught, Huck Finn or whatever it was that day. And so we had an all faculty meeting after school, and emergency meeting, and the assistant principal came in. Her face was swollen, and she had a huge bag of ice on the side of her face, and we talked about it, and a lot of teachers were involved, but that stuff like that happens. That's not common. One-on-one fights are pretty common though in schools.
So okay, so this on the same wavelength. This is I think a question I like to ask teachers a lot, especially teachers like you who work in a discipline in the theater department where you're with some of these kids 6-7 hours a day.
Yeah.
If you've got a kid who's in your class, you've got a kid who's in a show, you become a sort of secondary parental figure to a lot of these young individuals. And the theater department attracts a lot of people who don't necessarily fit in. They're a square peg trying to go in a round hole.
Yep.
that was my experience in high school. To me, it was like, oh man, look at these other weirdos like me. I finally have a place to fit in a little bit. So what's that responsibility like, knowing that you're shaping a young person in really more ways than one? Because, and not to discount a teacher who just sees them one period of a day for a humanities class, but I didn't have a relationship with that teacher. I had a relationship with my drama teacher and my tech director, and they were adults who I saw as as real leaders.
Both of them you
me.
still talk to 15 years later.
I do. I just had a 3-hour coffee date with my old drama teacher.
Yeah.
And we talked about the good old days, the pre-Kevin Kennedy days. So, but that's a huge responsibility. Mm-hmm. So, what does it feel like for that? And how do you put up the correct boundaries while still staying open?
It's interesting because I agree with you. What your assessment of theater is absolutely dead on. I coached basketball for 3 years, coached football for one disastrous year. And you with those
okay, kids, remember when the audience comes into the stadium today, we want to make sure that we take a bow.
No, with basketball, you get a very certain specific type of kid. It was all boys, so it was a type of kid within a very narrow range. But my saying is that the theater's the one spot in the building that everyone's welcome. So you might be the extrovert that likes to be on stage and wants lots of attention, but for every kid that's like that, we get the kid. My daughter was in theater. She told me that if I ever gave her a line in a show, she would immediately drop out. She wanted to be on stage. She wanted to dance in the back, and we're pretty close. That was her idea of theater. Yeah, that's her.
That's pretty much Tucker's experience.
Yeah,
later.
That's my experience every day.
Yeah.
Especially wearing the dress in the back, the pretty dress. But I have a lot of kids that are just like you said, weird, odd. I had a mother call me one time and say, "Yeah, I'd like to get my son involved." And I said, "Okay." And she goes, "I'm going to be honest with you. He's kind of an odd duck." And it turns out he was, and he's been one of my favorite students I've had for 3 years. And that. We get kids that love to paint. We get kids that love to build sets. We get kids. I've got a girl right now that's just loves to do props, and you try to find a niche for that kid. And some kids have horrible home lives, and they want a place to hang out, to feel like they belong. And so I'm a very big person on making sure that happens. The trick with theater is you want to make sure there's not a separation between tech and the actors, because if you have that, then they start to hate each other. So I insist that the techies are invited to the cast party. We have a rule that all the actors have to do 10 hours of set building and stuff like that. So and we have we have a lot of kids that kind of go back and forth, that'll do a show and then do tech the next show and that sort of thing. So, but in answer to your question, you spend a lot of time with these kids. And a former student who just graduated, who I became very close with, who just didn't have a good home situation, and you just want to let them know that you're there if they need anything. And she went off to college; she's doing great. So, but you just don't know, But it is kind of a fine line, because you're not their parent, but sometimes that's what they're looking for you to be. So.
Do you have a lot of former students who keep tabs and say hello?
Yeah, I do. It's interesting because I'm a teacher because of my high school English teacher, who died back in '94, and he became one of my best friends. And he died in '94. He would have been 30 years older than me, and he just took an interest in me and sort of mentored me. And he's the reason I'm an English teacher, and he had a strong passion for theater too. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, I have, and I've been at enough schools. And with Facebook nowadays, kids will reach out to me all the time. A former student that was a hockey player from 2007 just reached out to me the other day that I still keep in contact with. So yeah, you do.
And what happens when one of those kids starts to drift off a little bit, starts to become distant? I mean,
you mean after they've graduated, or while they're still a student?
While they're still a student.
That happens. You get kids that come and go. You get kids that kind of get sometimes they get wrapped up in the great thing about the theater community is we do a pretty good job of kind of knowing what's going on with all of our kids. I have a daughter that's a freshman now, but I talk enough with the kids that I can find out a lot of things, what's going on, who's doing some things they shouldn't be doing. So that I'm very aware, and I've had enough conversations where I pull the kid aside and, here, I've heard you're doing this or you're doing that. And that always surprises them that we know anything, which always is weird to me, that they think that you're adults, you know nothing, because I lie to my parents all the time and they don't know anything that I'm doing. And I'm like, hey, I heard you did this. What? How did you know that? And 99.9% of the time it's because a kid told me. It's not through direct observation almost ever. It's another kid told me, hey, so-and-so's doing this.
So you're telling me you got a lot of squealers.
Yeah, or sometimes it's a concerned kid, but yeah, we have a lot of moles planted around through the theater department. Snitches, yeah, snitches get stitches. Nah.
Kevin, does your background in performing inform your teaching? And
Absolutely,
how you kids.
Yeah, I teach my English a lot differently than the other English teachers. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just my style. But for instance, I'm teaching Julius Caesar right now to my sophomores. Well, other teachers, it's an English thing, and we'll break down the language. I do some of that too, but I'm like, this is what it was like when Shakespeare did it, and this is how they would have performed it. So I do a lot of stuff from the performance aspect, and how you would do this. I just did Romeo and Juliet last year, and that's a much different experience than reading the play or watching the movie. And most kids, and so I try to infuse my teaching with that. But also, I don't care what anybody says. A lot of teaching is a song and dance act. In a lot of ways, you're up there kind of doing your little, cracking your 5 jokes. I remember my high school teachers, you'd sit there and you go, yeah, they've told this story 4 other times. Well, you don't remember who you told it to. So you just keep telling them, And I'll have kids go, you told us that, Mr. Kennedy. And I'm like, well, you know what? I've got Alzheimer's, so, indulge me and let me tell it again.
My 9th grade teacher, Ms. Stoka, made the mistake of showing our class one of the film adaptations of Romeo and Juliet, because you see Juliet's boobs.
Yeah, that's
Yep,
like the
that's
1960s.
1968 Zeffirelli film. I show that one. I don't teach Romeo and Juliet, but I used to show that, yeah.
That was a thrill for us at 8th
Yep.
period.
Right. And I believe there's a butt in it as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so the boob shot is less than a second, but the butt shot of Romeo is a good 20 seconds. I have a funny story on that. I had a kid, Logan, a freshman, who was obsessed with the female anatomy. We'll put it like that. And so we're watching the movie, and I used to, my first year, you don't know what's the protocol. How do I handle this? Do I fast forward through that scene? I know teachers that would hold a piece of paper or a notebook up in front of the screen during that. The school district I was at the time, they're just like, it's part of the movie. And at first you don't say anything, but then when it happens, the kids are like, oh. And of course, the older kids tell the younger kids, oh, wait till this scene where they show Juliet's boobs. So you're like, okay. So I got to the point where I'd make a joke about it, okay? And this is before YouTube became huge, and you could just look up that section of the movie. So we're watching the movie, and I told the kids, yep, okay, just so no one's offended, they show Juliet's boobs and just da-da-da. And this kid, Logan, is just every day, we're going to see your boobs today? Oh, I can't wait to see your boobs. And is that going to happen? Yeah.
It's today the day, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah. And this kid is just, it's going to be the pinnacle of his high school career, seeing Juliet's boobs in this video. So, and I know it's a really quick shot. So they're in the scene where they're consummating the relationship in Act 3 in the movie. And right before it happens, everybody's facing the screen. I'm at the back of the room behind everybody. And right before it happens, I go, hey, Logan. And he turns around and looks at me. The boobs happen. All the boys ooh and ah. He turns back and goes, wait, rewind the film. No, wait. He was mad for the rest of the year. It was the greatest moment of my teaching career.
Kevin Kennedy, you've been a wonderful guest today. Thank you very much for coming in.
It's been a pleasure.
We really talked about a lot of stuff. Next time we'll have you on, we'll talk baseball, because I know that's another
love
passion.
Baseball. Twins.
Minnesota, yeah, that's where you're at?
Massive Twins fan.
Is this going to be the year they disappoint us again, or what?
Well, here's the deal. The World Series is during school, so the first two, one I was living in Notre Dame and I didn't get to go see them, and the second time I was living in Chicago. So I've been a lifelong Twins fan. I've never been there. I might just have to quit school and go down there if they win. But I don't know. I want to say yes, but every time I say yes, then they go 60 and 100 or something like that. So I'm a lifelong suffering Vikings and Twins and Minnesota fan. So
Did you follow the North Stars when they moved?
I did, and I'm not a huge hockey fan, but I did like them, and so I was pretty bummed. And I like the Wild, but I couldn't name a player on the. Well, no, I couldn't name a player.
What's the name of their
Parisi, I could name him.
What's the name of their soccer team? You remember?
The Minnesota.
Like the Minnesota
I want to say
Lightning
Miracles.
Rods. I don't know.
Something like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. For more info, including how you can help us keep the lights on by donating to our Patreon, visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all the sites that the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World or check out old ones, don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcasts that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. Plus, you can check out more about JJ at www.linebenders.com. Are we done? Are we done with this one? I've got an appointment to get my hair cut. Are we done? Okay, good. Later, everybody.